You may have noticed that sometimes peace can feel like a trap. I learned this the hard way. My name is Pamela Anderson, and if you listen to me for the next few minutes, you'll understand how a quiet dinner became the last conversation my husband and I ever had. It was a peaceful Friday night, the kind that feels so calm you might almost feel guilty for being happy. The dining room was softly lit with that warm amber glow Timothy loved. Soft jazz music played in the background, with a saxophone melody drifting through our home like gentle smoke. We were celebrating. He had just won an $8 million logistics contract, completing the fortune of 25 million he had built from nothing. He often said this deal would be his final mountain to climb. That evening, it seemed like we had finally reached the summit. We enjoyed dinner, laughing and teasing each other about everything, from his awkward dance moves to my habit of double checking the oven, even when it was turned off. For that night, there were no business calls, no financial reports, just us. After dessert, Timothy leaned back, loosened his tie, and offered that quiet smile that signals something was about to happen. Pam, he said, I need you to do something for me. Transfer everything to your account. I blinked. All of it? Everything? I asked. What do you mean, like the company accounts? All of it, he repeated softly. The houses, the investments, every last cent, just to be safe. The calm, almost rehearsed way he said it made the air feel tense. I laughed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Timothy, you sound like one of those doomsday planners. What's going on? He reached across the table, fingers barely touching mine. It's not panic, sweetheart. It's protection. Some things have been shifting at work, that's all. You're the one I trust to keep things steady if anything happens. There was that word if. He'd been cautious since his mild stroke 5 years ago, so I didn't press him. Finally, I said, forcing a smile. All right, first thing tomorrow, only because you asked so sweetly. He chuckled. Good. And now we won't talk business again tonight. Promise. I nodded. He poured more wine, and we danced barefoot in the kitchen, just like we used to when we were younger. The floor felt cool under my feet, and his hand was warm against my back. For a moment, it seemed as if time had paused just to give us a moment to breathe. Later, when I was washing the dishes, I caught him looking at me, the kind of look that feels like someone memorizing every detail. What? I asked with a laugh. He simply smiled. Nothing. You've always been the safe one. The next morning, I made the transfers exactly as he had instructed. Bank confirmation, signatures, everything legal and recorded. Once it was done, I sent him a photo of the receipt with a heart emoji. He replied with a thumbs up and wrote, Perfect, see you tonight. That was Sunday morning. By evening, my phone rang. Mrs. DeVoice was calm and professional. This is County General Hospital. Your husband's been brought in. You need to come quickly. My coffee mug hit the counter before I realized I had dropped it. It's strange how quickly peace can turn into a question you can't stop asking yourself. If you've ever had a day that began with laughter and ended in silence, share it in the comments with just one word. Are you ready? Because that's what he told me to do. And I didn't. The morning after that dinner felt normal, almost too normal. Sunlight streamed through our kitchen windows as usual, reflecting off the marble countertops and glinting on the half-empty wine glasses from the night before. I remember feeling how lively the house seemed. Nothing at that moment suggested the clock was already ticking down. On Saturday morning, Timothy left earlier than usual. He kissed my forehead, holding coffee in one hand and car keys in the other. Don't forget to rest today, he said. That gentle advice he had perfected over the years. I teased him, you say that as if you'll actually come home before it gets dark. He smiled. This time I will. He didn't. I spent much of that day tidying up, folding laundry, running errands, humming softly as the news played quietly in the background. In the afternoon, Miss Tilda, our housekeeper, stopped by to leave the dry cleaning and fresh sheets. She hovered near the doorway for a moment, looking unsure. Ma'am, she said carefully, I came to the office earlier today to deliver those new ledgers. Mr. Anderson was on the phone. He sounded upset. I frowned. Upset about what? She hesitated, glancing down at the floor. I didn't mean to listen in, but I heard him say, You're not ready for that, Miles. I responded, No. Then the door closed. Miles, our only son. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself disagreements happen, especially between a father and son working in the same business. Still, there was something in the way she said it, how her voice carried concern rather than gossip, that stayed with me. Thank you, Tilda, I told her. I'll have a word with him. But I didn't. That evening, I set the table for two out of a habit, lighting a candle the way Timothy liked. By 8, I sent him a picture of his empty plate and wrote, I'm eating your share. He responded with a simple message, still at the office. Save me some pie. It was such a small, everyday message, but I found myself reading it again and again later, like a prayer. Sunday morning was peaceful as well. The house carried a gentle scent of coffee and cleaning supplies. I walked past his study and noticed the drawer where we kept his watch was open. I closed it, thinking he had just been in a hurry. Around noon, he called, his voice calm but tired. I'll be late tonight. Sweetheart, don't wait up. Love you. I smiled. Love you too. Drive safely. That was the last time I heard his voice. Several hours later, I was folding laundry in our bedroom, a slow, quiet task that filled the silence. Outside, the storm was gathering, one of those that makes the air heavy and thick just before rain begins. I recall the clock ticking more loudly than usual and the sharp scent of starch in the fabric softener, almost burning my nose. When the phone buzzed, I didn't pay much attention. I wiped my hands and reached for it, expecting to see a message from Timothy, but it wasn't him. It was Mrs. Anderson. Her voice was steady but formal. This is County General Hospital. Your husband's been brought in. You should come right away. At first, the words didn't sink in. I stood there frozen, clutching the phone as if I hadn't heard correctly. Brought in? What do you mean brought in? Her voice softened. He collapsed in his office. Paramedics are working on him now. A heavy weight sank deep inside me, like the ground giving way beneath my feet. I don't recall hanging up the call. All I remember is holding my keys, the front door swinging open, rain hitting my face before I even realized it was pouring, the drive turning into a blur of lights, horns, and prayers I couldn't quite remember forming. The only clear thought I had was that he told me not to wait up, so I hadn't, and now I would give anything to have waited. When I reached the hospital entrance, I didn't feel fear yet, only a sense of urgency. It was that kind of blank, cold concentration that comes just before pain understands what it's supposed to do. I told myself it was weariness, dehydration, something simple and easy to fix. But beneath all that denial, a single thought started to whisper. It has been 48 hours since that dinner, and suddenly feeling safe no longer seemed enough. By the time I got to County General, the rain was pounding down in heavy sheets. I don't remember the drive, only hearing sirens somewhere ahead and feeling like the world was closing in around me. The sharp scent of disinfectant hit my nose before I even heard footsteps. Hospitals always have that strange silence, half grief, half practicality, a quiet that makes you afraid to breathe, too loud and too empty. I remember clutching my purse close to my chest as I hurried through those glass doors. Rain was still dripping from my hair. I didn't know what I was about to face. All I knew was that I had to reach him. At the reception, a nurse with gentle eyes looked up. Mrs. Anderson. Yes, I managed to say softly, barely above a whisper. She nodded kindly. Please, follow me. My shoes squeaked on the linoleum as we moved along. The hallway was too brightly lit, the air too cold. The nurse didn't speak, and I didn't ask any questions. When she stopped outside a room covered by a curtain, she turned to me and softly said, The doctor will explain everything. Inside, the machines were silent. No beeping, no rhythmic pulsing, and just a deep stillness that felt out of place in a room meant to help and save lives. Timothy lay there, pale and unmoving. A white sheet covered him from the chest down. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I had entered the wrong room. My husband couldn't be perfectly still like that. He was full of movement, hands constantly gesturing as he spoke, eyes intently observing the world around him. Mrs. Anderson, the doctor began, his voice gentle yet professional, blending compassion with medical authority. Your husband experienced a cardiac arrest while in his office. Paramedics administered CPR for more than 20 minutes before he was taken to the hospital. We did everything possible. I hesitated, unable to find the right words. We did everything possible. That phrase feels hollow. It weighs heavily on me. I sank into the chair beside the bed. My hands reached out and touched his chilling but familiar skin. I whispered his name once, then again, softer each time, hoping that repetition might bring some warmth back to him. Timothy, I am here, my love. It's me. I am right here. There was no response, only silence. The doctor left the room, promising to return once I was ready to fill out the forms. I didn't lift my gaze. I simply stared at the man who had spent the last 30 years creating a sense of security around us, now leaving me with only one strange word: safe. After some time, a nurse quietly entered the room to adjust the monitors. She paused near the doorway before speaking. Mrs. Anderson, for what it's worth, your husband wasn't alone when he collapsed. My eyes lifted quickly. He wasn't. She shook her head. Someone was already there when he fell. I believe it was your son. Security mentioned he called for help before the paramedics arrived. My son, I repeated in disbelief. Miles was here. Yes, ma'am. Her tone was cautious. He appeared calm and said he would stay behind to give a statement to the staff. Come. That word didn't quite fit. Miles had always been emotional, especially about his father. A flicker of confusion crossed my mind, but it was soon overwhelmed by waves of grief. I sat quietly for another moment, tracing the lines of Timothy's hand with my thumb, memorizing the way his wedding band shone under the fluorescent light. The ring had never left his finger, not even once. The sound of the elevator opening at the end of the corridor barely registered at first. I only realized it when the nurse straightened slightly and softly said, "Family." I turned to see Miles standing there, tall and calm, with Tanya beside him. For a moment, I nearly broke down. Seeing my son felt like a lifeline in a sea of confusion. I instinctively stood with my arms open, tears blurring my sight. Oh, Miles. But he didn't move toward me. He said plainly, "Mom," his voice steady and emotionless. It sounded rehearsed. "We need to talk about Dad's accounts. Our lawyers are here to make sure everything is settled properly." I froze, my arms still slightly raised. It took me a moment to understand what he had just said. I blinked at him, expecting him to correct himself, to speak kindly, to show some grief. But his face remained unmoved. Tanya's eyes briefly flickered toward the bed, then back to him. Behind them, a man dressed in a navy suit stepped off the elevator, carrying a leather briefcase. He didn't speak, only nodded politely. My throat went dry. "Miles, what are you talking about?" He cleared his throat, showing no emotion. "It's just procedure, Mom. We need to make sure the estate is protected." The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the air itself had changed temperature. I could still hear those soft clicking of the monitors behind me, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air, and the echo of the doctor's voice saying that we had done everything possible. Now, my son was here talking about accounts. For the first time since the phone call, I stopped crying because grief had been replaced by something colder: confusion. I slowly lowered my arms, looking at the people who were supposed to comfort me. In that quiet, sterile hum, I realized I no longer knew what this moment was. Grief makes the world feel muffled, as if sound is traveling through water. I remember standing in that hospital corridor, the humming of the overhead lights and the heavy scent of antiseptic filling the air around me. Miles and Tanya stood in front of me, dressed neatly, their eyes looking too dry and tired. Behind them was the man with the briefcase, the one Miles had introduced as our lawyer. He must have come straight from the elevator, his face already set, his presence too polished for such a place. He moved forward first, speaking softly and politely. "Mrs. Anderson, please accept my condolences. This is an unimaginable loss." I nodded in response. My words felt caught somewhere between my heart and throat. I thought he would step back to give me some space, but he didn't. Instead, he gently clicked open his leather briefcase and took out a folder. "If I could have a moment of your time," he said softly. "We will need some documents related to your husband's recent financial transfers. It will help us ensure everything moves smoothly through the probate process." I blinked, surprised. "What?" He gave a small smile, as if he'd practiced it 100 times. Just to be clear, we're talking about the wire transfers carried out in the last 3 days. The accounts move only into your name. His words hit me hard like stones. I felt the color leave my face. You're here about that now? Miles stepped forward, his tone firm. Mom, please. We're just trying to make sure everything is done correctly. The right way, I repeated, my voice trembling halfway through. Your father has gone miles away. I can barely stand. And you're... It's not like that, Tanya gently interrupted, touching my arm. Her hand was warm, but her eyes were cold as ice. We just need to protect what Dad built. Do you realize how many people could take advantage of this situation right now? I looked at her, confused. Who exactly would be taking advantage? Tanya didn't flinch. That's why we have legal advice. The lawyer cleared his throat politely, as if this were a meeting and not a moment filled with grief. Mrs. Anderson, this isn't an accusation. We only need to verify the transfers your husband requested. This is standard procedure to avoid any issues with the government authorities. I couldn't even take in half of what he was saying. I was in the hospital myself, but my mind was still back at our dining table 2 nights ago, hearing Timothy's voice whispering, just to be safe. My lips parted, but no words came out. He interpreted my silence as agreement. If you have any signed instructions or digital confirmations, he continued, please send copies to our office within 24 hours. I can give you a contact card. That's when I found my voice. My husband hasn't even been dead an hour, and you're already counting his money. The lawyer paused briefly, but his expression changed faster than his conscience. Mrs. Anderson, I assure you this is simply administrative. I am here out of respect. Miles exhaled impatiently. Mom, this is not about money, it's about control. Dad would have wanted full transparency. I looked at him, truly looked at him. His posture was too stiff, his tone too carefully prepared. Did you speak to him today? I asked. He blinked, surprised. What? The nurse told me you were here when he collapsed. Were you with him? A flicker of something, just a glimpse in his eyes. I was nearby. That's not the point. I didn't press further, not at that moment. The air in the hallway already felt wrong, like something essential had shifted and I was the last to notice. The lawyer, still polite, gently closed his briefcase. We can follow up later tonight if you'd like, Mrs. Anderson. In the meantime, please take this. He slid a slim folder across the counter toward me. The hospital lights reflected off the top sheet, casting a dull shine across the front with bold black letters. It read Temporary Injunction Petition. For a moment, I did not even breathe. The sounds around me became muffled. The nurse's words, the squeaking shoes, the steady hum of machines. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding loudly and unevenly against my chest. I shifted my gaze from the folder to my son. What is this? Miles looked at Tanya. She avoided my eyes. Just paperwork, he said softly. You'll understand later. He turned away before I could respond, as if grief followed a timetable and I was merely wasting his time. That was when I realized something that would stay with me for weeks. This was not just a simple misunderstanding. It was an act, and I was the only person there who hadn't prepared my part. Grief is the only silence people seem to notice. Every voice at Timothy's funeral sounded cautious, attentive, almost afraid to break the quiet. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The flower arrangements were spotless: orchids, white roses, lilies, things Timothy loved. It was a private service, small and costly, the kind of goodbye that money could arrange. But love couldn't make it easier. Miles organized everything without once looking in my direction. He stood just a few feet away beside Tanya, stiff and upright, his suit perfect. People whispered that he was so strong for his mother. They didn't notice the distance, that invisible wall between us, built from all the words left unspoken since the hospital. When the pastor finished, I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My tears had already become confusion. How did we go from a dinner table to a grave in just 2 days? Timothy's coffin was a deep mahogany, the same color as his old office desk. I remember running my fingers along the wood and thinking he would hate this weather. The wind was sharp, unexpectedly cold for spring. I caught a glimpse of Tanya's hand nestled inside Miles's arm. Her nails, a soft pink, carefully polished, and wondered how anyone could appear so composed while burying a loved one. People whispered condolences, embraced me gently, and offered superficial comfort. I nodded politely, expressed my thanks, and managed a faint smile, putting on an act of grief while my mind was elsewhere. By the time we moved inside for the reception, I felt as if I were walking underwater. The grand hall of the estate had never seemed so unfamiliar. Every chandelier shone brightly, every tray was replenished with careful precision, every conversation hushed when I passed by. Grief had transformed my home into a showcase of polite sympathy. Miles took charge of greeting guests, thanking everyone for coming and assuring them that the family was doing well. Tanya stood beside him, touching his shoulder at just the right moments. I tried to catch his eye once, just once, but he looked through me as if I were part of the decor. That was the first time I truly realized my son wasn't grieving, he was performing. Halfway through the reception, I slipped away to the side veranda for some fresh air. The sound of wind whispering through the oaks felt more genuine than the words drifting around inside. I closed my eyes, allowing the cold to settle on my face. That was when I overheard it. A voice just around the corner, gentle but unmistakable. Tanya mentioned they argued again that evening. A woman softly whispered. My eyes widened at the mention of ownership. He wanted to take control, but Mr. Anderson said no. The voice continued, quiet but unconcerned. It was Tanya's cousin, young, talkative, one of those who mistake gossip for a sign of connection. Another woman quickly hushed her, but the words had already been heard. Argued again that night. I clenched the railing tightly. Timothy had argued with Miles before, definitely. But recently it had become more frequent, happening behind closed doors with clipped tones that always softened when I entered the room. He would say, "It's just business." But there was always a fragile edge to his voice when he spoke those words. Now that fragile tone echoed in my mind. I turned back toward the hallway, examining the faces around me. Tanya smiled at a group of executives, laughter rehearsed, posture flawless. Miles poured himself a drink, nodded at something someone mentioned, and slid into another conversation as if nothing had changed. Inside my chest, though, something had. I stayed silent, saying nothing to either of them. Not yet. But I observed every gesture, every glance. It wasn't sorrow I saw, it was calculation. When most of the guests had gone, I found myself sitting alone by the fireplace, staring into the fading flames. My reflection flickered in the glass, pale and still. I was trying to make sense of a picture that hadn't yet come together. Timothy's cryptic warning, Miles's distant aloofness, Tanya's calm composure, that's when I heard footsteps. Slow, measured. I turned to see a familiar face at the door, Mr. Lell, Timothy's personal lawyer. He politely took off his hat, his face showing no emotion. "Mrs. Anderson," he said quietly, "I need a moment of your time, if possible, privately." I nodded, pushing myself up from the chair. "Of course, what is it?" He glanced toward the staircase to ensure no one was nearby to overhear, then lowered his voice. "It concerns something your husband left behind." The words lingered in the air, gentle yet heavy. For the first time that day, my heart didn't feel like it was breaking. Instead, it was pounding. The house was too silent after the funeral. I had always enjoyed quiet moments, but this silence felt wrong. Too thick, too tense, as if it was waiting for me to notice something I didn't want to see. Every tick of the grandfather clock seemed louder. The scent of flowers from the parlor had already become overpowering, sweet to the point of making me feel ill. When the doorbell rang that Monday morning, I nearly ignored it. I thought it was another neighbor, bringing casseroles or sympathy cards I couldn't read. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a neighbor. It was Mr. Lell, Timothy's personal lawyer, the same man who had handled every contract, every trust, and every careful step of our life together. He looked smaller than I remembered, wearing a damp black coat from the rain, his hat tucked respectfully under his arm. "Mrs. Anderson," he said softly, "I'm sorry to intrude. May I come in?" I led him into Timothy's study. The room still carried his scent, a mix of cedar, leather, and faint traces of the cologne he wore to every meeting. His reading glasses sat on the desk where he had left them the previous Friday night. I hadn't had the strength to move them. Mr. Lell placed his briefcase down gently. taking a long breath before speaking. Your husband trusted me with many things, Mrs. Anderson, but he trusted you most. That's why he asked me to come today. I frowned as I sat across from him. To come for what? He paused, choosing his words carefully. There were notable inconsistencies in the company's internal records. Timothy suspected the funds were being shifted from the main logistics division into smaller shell companies. Quietly, I blinked, processing this. Redirected by whom? His eyes met mine, cautious yet steady. He believed your son might be involved. For a moment, the words didn't quite register. I heard them, but they didn't fully make sense. I simply looked at him, waiting for him to clarify, hoping he would correct himself or mention someone else, suggesting it was all a misunderstanding. Mr. Lell, I said softly, Miles might have made mistakes, but he wouldn't steal from his own father. He sighed. Timothy wasn't certain either. He wished he was wrong, but he found forged authorizations under Miles's executive code and strange transfers masked as consulting fees. That's why he took precautions. The transfer, I said slowly, to my account. He nodded. Exactly. It wasn't random. It was protection. He wanted to ensure the fortune was kept safe in your name so it couldn't disappear. If the investigation reached the board, I felt my pulse race in my throat. The memory of that dinner came rushing back. The way Timothy's voice had softened, the weight in his eyes when he said, just to be safe. Mr. Lell opened his briefcase and took out a long sealed envelope that was slightly yellowed at the edges. He left this for you, he said. He told me to only open it after his death. His exact words were, if anything happens, she will know when to open it. My hands trembled as I took it. The flap was still sealed. Timothy's handwriting was scrawled across the front, reading for Pamela, only if I'm gone. The air seemed too thin. Carefully, I broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of paper inside. His handwriting was steady and deliberate, filling the page. Pam, if you're reading this, then the quiet I feared has arrived. I saw too much and said too little. I trusted where I shouldn't have, and now I need you to safeguard what we have built. Do not let them change the story. You were always the one who kept us safe. I read it twice, then a third time until the words blurred together on the page. When I finally looked up, Mr. Lell was watching me gently. He wanted you to understand why he acted as he did. He wasn't hiding from you. He was trying to give you control before someone else took it away. My throat tightened. He believed Miles would betray him. He hoped he wouldn't. But hope, Mr. Lell whispered softly, doesn't close ledger books. Outside, the rain grew heavier against the windows, a slow drum that filled the quiet between us. I folded the letter back into its envelope, my hands now steady. Something inside me, an old, scared part, went very still. I didn't yet know what I would do, but I understood this much. Whatever Timothy had tried to stop had already begun, and if he trusted me to keep it safe, I would do so. Grief has no set schedule, but banks do. By Tuesday morning, my phone kept ringing nonstop. Unknown numbers, polite voices, words I only half understood, judicial hold, temporary injunction, probate inquiry. Each phrase felt like a stranger walking into my house and rearranging furniture I hadn't invited them to touch. At first, I thought there was some mistake. Timothy had always been very careful with paperwork. Everything we owned was clear, traceable, and shared between us. But when I received the third call from our private banker, I realized this wasn't an error. It was deliberate. Mrs. Anderson, the banker said cautiously, I'm sorry, but a court order was filed yesterday morning. It puts a temporary hold on all joint and corporate accounts while they review things. Review of what? I asked. She hesitated, her tone becoming more cautious. Your son, Mr. Miles Anderson, submitted a claim requesting oversight to make sure everything is handled properly. Until the issues are clarified, we are not allowed to authorize withdrawals, transfers, or access beyond the very basics for personal expenses. My hand grew cold as I held the phone. He has filed this, my son. Yes, ma'am. It was less than 12 hours since the medical report was recorded. Less than 12 hours. He hadn't even waited for the death certificate to be completely dry. I said thank you in a mechanical way, hung up, and sat in Timothy's study. The air still carried a faint scent of his cologne, that citrus wood blend he always wore. But now the scent that remained was sharper, the smell of betrayal, clean and fresh, like ink on paper. I immediately called Mr. Lell. He arrived within an hour, his coat still damp from the morning drizzle. He didn't bother with any pleasantries. I saw the folder he placed on the desk. Miles's lawyer filed it under the guise of safeguarding the estate's cash flow. It's a smart story, framing it as responsible management rather than hostility. He's shutting me out, I said quietly. Leal nodded once. Essentially, yes, the accounts are on hold until we can confirm that the transfers Timothy authorized were legitimate and voluntary. I looked at him. We can do that, can't we? All the documents were signed, timed, and verified. He opened the folder, revealing a series of printed confirmations. Each transaction was handled correctly. The signatures match. The compliance officer gave his approval. There is nothing unusual, so why is the account still frozen? He leaned back slightly because legality isn't the only concern. Mrs. Anderson, your son's lawyer, understands that suspicion can often be louder than the facts. I rub my temples, feeling tiredness press behind my eyes as he begins to plant doubt. Lel simply said yes. And until that doubt is resolved, everything you and Timothy have built remains stuck in limbo. I gazed at the papers in front of me, numbers and signatures all neatly arranged, a clear record of Timothy's final decision. They should have appeared as indicators of safety, but instead they resembled pieces of a language I no longer understood. Leal's voice grew softer. I have ordered official copies of every transaction Timothy made in the past week. Once we establish the timeline, I'll have them delivered by courier directly from the bank. We can contest the injunction? I nodded, though my thoughts drifted back to that dinner table. The sound of Timothy's voice when he said he needed to be cautious. He must have known something. He always did. Lel, I said after a long pause, how much longer until this is over? He sighed. These things don't move quickly. Miles has already taken on the role of acting in place. The court will handle this carefully. He is family? I looked toward the fireplace. The ashes still faint from the night before. Timothy was the same. Leal's expression grew stern. I'll handle the paperwork. But Pamela, he paused, carefully choosing his words. The question we need to answer is not just whether your husband signed those transfers. It's why he felt the need to do so. His tone was different now, calm, investigative. Why? I wondered silently. He leaned forward, speaking softly. To understand what is really happening, we must know what took place that night, every detail. Who was in that office? Who made the final call? Who left first? Outside, rain gently tapped against the windows, steady and persistent. I looked at the papers on the desk, evidence of a man trying to safeguard something he already knew was at risk. I didn't realize then, but that single question, what really happened that night, would be the turning point that changed everything. The company's headquarters was located on the edge of downtown, a sleek 8-story building of glass and quiet ambition. I hadn't been there since the funeral, but as the elevator carried me upward, I noticed how much this building still smelled of Timothy, coffee, printer ink, and a faint hint of cedar polish. It was strange how the smell of a place could linger after the person who built it was gone. Mr. Lell had arranged access to Timothy's office, citing the need to retrieve personal belongings. The staff kept their distance, polite but uncomfortable. Everyone avoided eye contact as if grief could be contagious. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I encountered that same heavy silence, a silence that felt less respectful and more afraid. Timothy's office was at the end of the corridor, its doors shut, blinds half closed. I hesitated before reaching for the handle. The plaque on the door still read Timothy W. Anderson, founder and CEO. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, a woman who seemed more like a stranger than a widow. Inside, everything was just as he had left it, papers neatly stacked, his pen resting beside a half-empty glass of water. His chair was turned slightly away from the desk, facing the city. The sunlight from the window stretched across the carpet like a blade, casting a faint outline where paramedics had knelt. The custodian, an older man with gentle eyes, stayed in the doorway. His name badge read Raphael. He had worked with the company for many years. Timothy always called him the heartbeat of the building, Mrs. Anderson, he said softly. I didn't expect to see you here. I just needed to come, I replied softly. Did you happen to be here that night? I couldn't finish the question. Raphael nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I was on floor duty around 8:30. I was cleaning near the elevators when I heard voices. Loud ones, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Miles. They were arguing. Are you sure it was my son? He nodded again. Yes, ma'am. He was shouting. Said something like, You're treating me like a child. Then I heard a crash, a glass breaking. Maybe a few minutes later, your husband's door opened. Mr. Miles came out quickly, didn't say a word. She hurried past me toward the elevators. My stomach tightened, and my husband, Raphael, looked down. I checked again a few minutes later, but the door was shut once more. I figured he needed some space. I never imagined what had happened. His voice fainted. I took a slow breath, glancing at the desk. Everything appeared untouched. There were no signs of disorder, only a strange sense of calm. I asked, Did anyone else come that night? He paused to think. Yes, Mrs. Tanya stopped by earlier, around 7:30, I believe. She brought a small container of takeout soup, saying she was dropping off dinner for her father-in-law. I asked, Did she stay long? He replied, Not much, maybe 10 minutes or less. She left before Mr. Miles arrived. I felt the room shift slightly. Are you sure about the times? He hesitated before nodding. Yes, I'm sure. The security cameras would show it. Mr. Lel stepped closer. That's what we need to verify. Could you show us the access logs for that evening? Raphael led us down the hallway to the small security office. The room was tight, and the low hum of monitors filled the space. He entered a request, and within moments, a list of electronic records appeared on the screen. Badges, times, locations. Raphael pointed at the screen. Mrs. Tanya Anderson's entry was at 7:34 p.m., with her exit recorded at 7:43. Then his finger moved lower. Mr. Miles Anderson's first entry was at 8:19 p.m., with an exit at 8:33. He re-entered at 8:48. Re-entered again, I repeated. He nodded. The second entry was 15 minutes later. There was no recorded time for his exit. Lowell leaned closer to the monitor, furrowing his brow. That suggests he re-entered and stayed until after your husband collapsed. I stared at the digital numbers, which suddenly seemed heavier than words. Timothy's entire final hour was now just a series of timestamps, 7:34, 8:19, 8:48, and none of them included me. What was he doing back inside the building? I quietly asked. Raphael hesitated, lowering his voice. I don't know, ma'am, but when the alarm sounded, he was the one who hurried to the front desk and told us to call 911. The quiet that followed was filled with the steady hum of the monitors. Lel slowly straightened up, glancing at me. We'll need copies of those logs, Lel said. Raphael nodded. I'll print them for you, but if I may say so, Mr. Timothy didn't deserve what happened. He was a good man. I swallowed hard. Yes, he was. As we left the office, I looked back once more at Timothy's desk. The papers still neatly stacked. The chair still turned toward the window. He had always said the company would outlive him. Standing there, I realized someone had made sure of that, though not in the way he had intended. Hospitals tend to make truth sound like paperwork. Everything is written down, edited, sanitized until the facts lose their human touch. That was what I was thinking when Mr. Lel and I sat in the small consultation room at County General, waiting for nurse Becca Hollins. She had been Timothy's assigned cardiac nurse for nearly a year, responsible for his checkups after the stroke and adjusting his medications as needed. She entered quietly, hands folded, her eyes moving quickly between us. She appeared tired, not the kind of tired that comes from working night shifts, but the kind that stems from guilt. Thank you for meeting with us, Lel said softly. We have a few questions about Mr. Anderson's charting in the days leading up to his passing. And Becca nodded stiffly. Of course, I wasn't sure what this was about. Lel slid a copy of the dosage chart across the table. We noticed an inconsistency. The file shows two versions of the same record, one marked as a revision, timestamped 2 hours after the original. Can you explain why that is? Her fingers twitched slightly. It was an adjustment. I realized later I had entered the wrong dosage and corrected it. Lel's tone remained calm. Which dosage was incorrect? The first one or the second? Her eyes flicked up briefly, then shifted away. The first? Then why? Lel asked. Did the supervising doctor never approve the correction? Becca froze. The silence grew long enough for me to hear the hum of the ceiling light. I wasn't told to do it, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. By whom? Lowell pressed. Her answer came like a breath of relief. She had been holding it in for days. Mrs. Tanya Anderson called me that evening. She said Mr. Anderson had been feeling strange, dizzy, and restless. She asked me to review his medical records from a distance and correct any errors before the doctor saw them. She mentioned she didn't want him to be embarrassed by another forgotten pill. I leaned forward slowly. She asked you to change a medical record. She said it was just a correction of an entry. Becca said quickly, her voice tinged with panic. I didn't think she was family. She said she was calling from his office. I thought she was trying to help. Lel opened a thin folder and took out another sheet of paper. And this payment, he said calmly, does that look familiar? Her face lost all color. Where did you get that? It's a disbursement from a company sub-account, he replied, pointing to the header. $40,000 was processed 3 days before the revision marked as consulting services. The name of the recipient was Rebecca Holland. She swallowed hard. That money wasn't from them. It came through a third-party vendor. She thought it was a bonus. Did you sign a consulting agreement? No. Her voice wavered. I didn't ask any questions. I felt my nails pressing into my palms. Every word she spoke made the room seem smaller. My husband's trust had been rewritten like an invoice, just another document someone had decided to change. Lel stayed calm, although his jaw clenched. Mrs. Holland, do you understand the seriousness of changing dosage notes for a patient who died 48 hours later? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. She said it was harmless. Lel carefully gathered the papers. I don't think you understood at the time, but now it's important that you cooperate. I will be submitting an affidavit to reopen the case as an undetermined cause of death. You will probably be contacted for questioning. Becca looked at me with her face pale and trembling. Mrs. Anderson, I am sorry. I never meant to harm anyone. For the first time, I felt no sympathy, just a deep, cold stillness. You didn't just hurt someone, I said quietly. You helped erase him. Lowell rose, tucking the file into his briefcase, said, We will take care of the rest, Pamela, but the pieces are starting to fit together. The payment, the revision, the timing, all of it points to coordination. I stood up slowly, smoothing my coat, understanding that coordination requires intention. He nodded slightly. Yes, and having intent changes everything. As we walked back down the sterile corridor, the lights above softly buzzed, flickering just enough to make the shadows move. I sensed a shift inside me. Not grief, not anger, something sharper. By the time we reached the lobby, Lel's phone stopped working. He looked at the screen, then at me. I will request that the death certificate be reviewed. He spoke softly. By the end of the day, it will no longer say cardiac arrest. It will say undetermined. And just like that, the story of Timothy's death was no longer considered closed. It had been reopened. The day after the nurse's confession, I walked into Timothy's study alone. The curtains were half drawn, with sunlight streaming through in long, uneven strips across the carpet. The room was exactly as it had been since the funeral. His pen still on the blotter, the photo of us in Tuscany still sitting beside the desk lamp. Our smiles frozen in another time. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, perhaps closure, or maybe a sign of him I hadn't already buried. But something about the nurse's story kept echoing in my mind. Tanya's call, the word harmless, the $40,000 consulting fee. Timothy was always very cautious with everything he handled, especially his medication. If anyone had tampered with it, there would be some sign. I sat in his chair and looked around the desk. His daily pill organizer was open, about half empty. Every bottle had its label facing forward. That was the kind of man he was. On the far left, near his drawer, I noticed something faint. A tiny scratch on the wood, hardly visible, unless the light hit it just right. I pulled the drawer open. It was empty, but as I ran my fingers along the inner panel, I felt a ridge. There was a false bottom. My heartbeat quickened. I carefully slid a letter opener beneath the edge and gently lifted. Below the panel was a single item wrapped in tissue paper. I unfolded it slowly and froze in place. A small brown glass vial. The label read Nature Herbal Rest Formula, a supplement Timothy would likely dismiss as nonsense. I turned it over in my hand. The liquid inside had a faint amber hue that caught the light. There was only a third of it remaining. Lel arrived an hour later. When I showed him the vial, he furrowed his brows in a way I hadn't seen before. "Where did you find this?" I asked softly. "Hidden in his desk? It was labeled as a supplement, but he never used herbal remedies. Do you know that?" He looked at it under the lamp. "No prescription barcode, no distributor address. It appears homemade," I said. Lel nodded slowly and seemed to forget about it easily. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall, just a normal, familiar sound that feels intrusive when everything else seems unsettling. What if this was what caused him to collapse? I asked. "That's not something we can decide for sure." Lel answered, "We'll find out." I responded quickly. "I know someone. An old college friend named Celia. She's a pharmacist at Lakeview Labs. I can ask her to discreetly check what's inside." Lel looked at me, considering. "Do it today." Quietly. "No one else needs to know just yet." Celia agreed to meet within the hour. When I entered her small office, she raised an eyebrow at the vial. "Are you sure you want me to test this?" "It looks more like a boutique mixture than something regulated. Just tell me what's in it," I requested. She carefully unscrewed the cap, dipped a thin glass rod into the liquid, and placed a single drop on a strip of reagent paper. The color gradually changed from pale yellow to deep red. Celia's expression shifted instantly. "This is an herbal," she said softly. "It's a sedative compound, something similar to chloral hydrate. If someone with high blood pressure or on heart medication took this regularly, it could cause arrhythmia or something worse," I said, gripping the edge of her desk. "Worse," she said, meeting my gaze. "Heart failure, but it would look like a natural cardiac arrest." The room fell silent. Even the hum of her computer felt distant. Celia capped the vial and pushed it back across the table. "Where did you get this?" I hesitated. "It belonged to Timothy?" Her face softened immediately. "I'm sorry, Pam. Whoever gave it to him knew exactly what they were doing." When I got back home, my hands were trembling. Lel waited on the porch, his coat collar turned up against the wind. I handed him the vial and the note from Celia. He looked it over quickly, his jaw tightening. "She's certain, yes." He exhaled slowly and evenly. Then he looked up at me. "We test it," he said quietly. "But we don't tell anyone yet. That means not the police, not the court, not even your son. Not until the report is undeniable." The way he said it, calm and careful, made my skin crawl. Because this wasn't just proof anymore, it was a weapon. Once we used it, there was no turning back. Courtrooms tend to strip people down to their core. You can dress up, practice your tone, rehearse your story, but under those fluorescent lights, the truth or the absence of it reveals itself in every pause. I sat in the front row beside Mr. Lel, with his hands folded and eyes straight ahead across the aisle. Miles adjusted his tie, his face calm, too calm. Tanya sat beside him, her expression painted with that kind of practiced sympathy, the sort that looks good in photos but feels empty in person. The bailiff announced the case, and the sound of wooden chairs scraping against the floor broke the silence. This wasn't a criminal trial. Not yet. This was a civil matter, the request to keep the financial freeze in place. But everyone in that room knew it was about more than numbers. It was the first real fight over what Timothy had left behind and for the truth he stood for. Miles's lawyer was the first to speak, tall and smooth, his voice polished as if he had rehearsed every tone. "Your Honor," he began, "we recognize the tragedy of Mr. Anderson's passing, but what we question is the timing and legitimacy of the full transfer of assets to Mrs. Pamela Anderson, which was completed less than 48 hours before his death." He left that hanging in the air like a stain that wouldn't fade. She insists the transfer was requested by her husband. However, we lack witnesses to confirm this. There is no medical clearance indicating he was of sound mind. No approval from the board for the business holdings. It is quite unusual. Lowell slowly rose, calm as a tide approaching the shore. Being unusual does not necessarily mean it is illegal. The transfers were authorized by Mr. Anderson himself, digitally signed and notarized in accordance with the bank's procedures. All the timestamps align with his location data. I have those records here. He handed a file to the clerk. The lawyer barely glanced at it before speaking again. Even if those documents are genuine, we cannot rule out coercion. Grief can impair judgment, but guilt can do the same. I looked directly at Miles. He avoided my gaze. Mrs. Anderson had full access to her husband's private office. The lawyer continued pacing smoothly. She was set to gain complete control of a estate worth $25 million given her husband's recent health issues. It is not surprising to consider the possibility of emotional influence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof of pressure or coercion, counselor? He offered a slight smile. Not yet. However, the rapid nature of these transactions and the secretive way they were handled cast serious doubt on the true intent. The lawyer didn't even flinch. Your Honor, these accusations are an insult to the honesty of a man who built his reputation on accuracy. Mr. Anderson was not forced or pressured. He was cautious. And if the opposing counsel questions his mental state, they should consider why Mr. Anderson's son, who was set to inherit, filed an injunction less than 12 hours after the death certificate was signed. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. I saw Miles tighten his jaw. Tanya's hand moved over his a little too quickly. The lawyer continued confidently. We have notarized instructions, signed, witnessed, and time-stamped, directing all asset to Mrs. Anderson's account. Furthermore, Mr. Anderson's personal attorney, myself, verified those instructions on record before his death. We can provide logs from the bank's internal system, confirming both the digital authorization and physical signature. The judge nodded, flipping through the first few pages. That's persuasive, counselor, but I will wait until we have reviewed all the documentation thoroughly. Miles's lawyer pressed again, now with a softer tone. Your Honor, we are not disputing the sentiment. We are contesting control. The Anderson estate employs more than 100 people. An unverified transfer threatens their livelihoods. We only ask the court to maintain stability while we determine whether this transaction truly reflects Mr. Anderson's intentions. The judge leaned back. You are requesting a freeze based on the possibility, not solid evidence. That is not stability. That is guesswork. Lel did not smile, but I noticed the faintest flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but steady. My husband's purpose was not about exerting control. It was about protecting us. He uncovered irregularities in his company's financial records, money being transferred under false names. He asked me to move everything to keep it safe. Those were his words. Keep it safe. I followed his instructions precisely. Tanya shifted slightly next to Miles, her fingers trembling lightly against the edge of her clutch. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. For the next hour, the lawyers exchanged statements, documents, policies, and evidence. I didn't catch most of it. My attention remained fixed on Tanya's hands, neatly manicured with pale pink nail polish. They trembled when Lel mentioned forged consulting invoices. They trembled again when he discussed medical record revisions made under family guidance. The judge called a recess, saying they would review the bank logs before making a decision. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as lawyers gathered their papers and voices overlapped. That's when Lel's phone buzzed on the table. He looked down and his eyes narrowed as he read the message on the screen. Then he looked at me. The lab results had just arrived, he said quietly. The noise of the room seemed to fade away. I could only hear those words, calm but precise, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. Justice doesn't always start with sirens. Sometimes it begins softly, in whispers, cold and deliberate, gentle enough to seem like mercy. When Mr. Lel called me the next morning, his voice was calm and steady, the tone I had come to recognize. Something significant had changed. They found Pamela, he said simply. The sedative was in his system. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my ear to the foam. Are you sure? I asked. The toxicology report confirms it. The same compound from the vial, a chloral derivative mixed with traces of his hypertension medication. A lethal combination. The timestamp from the lab matches the day he collapsed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, and my chest was tight with emotion. Timothy's last 2 days played in my mind like a relentless loop. His laugh over dinner, the gentle way he said to keep it safe, the warmth of his hand before it grew cold. What happens now? I finally asked. Lel exhaled. Now it shifts from a civil matter to a criminal one, but we must be cautious. The report was flagged by the county coroner, not the hospital, which indicates someone already suspects that the original medical notes were altered. I frowned. The nurse, he hesitated, and whoever ordered the changes. Within 48 hours, the county investigation was reopened with the official classification of death as undetermined. 2 plainclothes detectives arrived at my home that Thursday afternoon. They were polite but meticulous. Detective Moreno and her partner Halpern. They spoke softly, asking for copies of Timothy's prescriptions, his daily routine, and the contents of the vial. They didn't need prompting. Lel had already provided all the information. We'll be re-interring the hospital staff, Moreno said as she closed her notepad. Just routine follow-up. But it wasn't routine. I recognized that tone, the one that implies we already have some information. We're just waiting for confirmation. That confirmation arrived sooner than any of us anticipated. By Friday morning, Leal called again. She broke down. He asked, who? The nurse. Detectives interviewed her at the station last night. She admitted everything. Tanya had contacted her 2 days before Timothy's collapse, requesting dosage adjustments and private follow-up notes. She was paid $40,000 for her cooperation. I closed my eyes, and Miles Lell's pause was long enough for me to understand. He approved the transfer through a shell vendor. It came from one of the company's corporate sub-accounts. The room fell silent. My mind tried to make sense of it all, but the truth settled over me like thick fog, impossible to see through. My son had organized it, and Tanya had carried out the plan. Did the nurse explain why? I asked softly. She told me that Miles said it was to help his father feel more comfortable before the transition. The voice of Lowell grew more serious. He made it sound compassionate, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Rest easier. The words sounded mocking. Timothy hadn't been resting. He had been fighting for the company, for the family, for me. Lel continued. The detectives confirmed the payment trail. Every transfer matched the dates on the forged logs. It was watertight. What happens next? He asked plainly. For both Miles and Tanya, the DA's office is in the process of filing charges now. They will keep it quiet until the legal papers are served. No media, no leaks, just quiet justice. That phrase stayed with me long after we finished talking. I looked around Timothy's study, at the books he collected, the framed certificate from the year he opened his first branch, and the faint indentation his pen had left on the desk. Everything he built was founded on trust in people, in work, and in family, and that trust had been damaged from within. As evening arrived, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, gentle yet unceasing. Somewhere across town, detectives were probably reviewing security footage, gathering signatures, and preparing for what was to come. But in this house, all I could hear was the steady ticking of the clock. That same clock had marked the end of our last dinner together. Later, Lel came by and left copies of the toxicology report. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. You should get ready, Pamela. Once they proceed, things will move quickly. When the financial evidence is clear, it's all over. I nodded, my hands shaking, but I said, I'm ready. He looked at the sealed folder on my coffee table and said, keep that report safe. It's the line that separates doubt from the truth. I looked down at the folder, the proof of everything they had done, and a strange sense of calm washed over me, the kind that only appears when the storm is finally about to break. As Lel turned to leave, his phone buzzed once. He glanced at the message and then looked back at me. That was Moreno, he said. The DA approved what? He looked into my eyes. Arrest warrants. Outside, the rain continued to fall steadily. It only grew louder. Justice arrived quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just the sound of tires rolling over wet pavement outside my home. That morning, I had been sitting in Timothy's old chair, holding a pen, signing deposition papers that made my stomach tighten. Words like fraudulent transfers, involuntary manslaughter, evidence tampering, these didn't seem real on paper, but they were all that remained to describe what had been done. By the time Mr. Lell arrived, the detectives were already on their way to serve the warrants. He didn't need to say a word. I could see it in the way he shifted his coat and softly said my name. Pamela, they are being picked up. I asked. He nodded. Both of them at different places, Miles at the corporate office and Tanya at their home. I held onto the edge of the table tightly. The rain outside resumed its steady pattern, the same gentle rhythm from the night Timothy died. Liel placed the folder containing the deposition documents next to me. You've done what you needed to do. You've honored his wishes. I wanted to believe him, but the word honor felt wrong. There was no honor here, only the plain truth. Cold and heavy, it didn't feel like a victory. An hour later, my phone vibrated. A brief message from Detective Moreno appeared on the screen. In custody. I stared at those two words until they blurred. News spread quickly in quiet circles. By the evening, the courthouse was filled with murmurs. Court clerks, security personnel, and even junior lawyers pretended not to listen. Lel had arranged for me to stay out of the media spotlight, but I still saw it later that night on a muted TV in his office. Miles was being led out of the building, his jaw clenched, eyes straight ahead. Tanya was a few steps behind, her head bowed, a jacket draped over her shoulders. Her face didn't show fear. It was something smaller, shame trying to hide behind a look of calm. Are they saying anything? I asked. Lel shook his head. Miles hadn't spoken since they announced the charges, but Tanya, he hesitated, flipping through his notes. She's talking. That word hit me like a cold gust. Talking. She says she didn't realize it would kill him. Her statement reads, he said it would just calm him down. I swallowed hard. She said yes. She's naming Miles as the person who obtained the compound and directed the nurse. The room went quiet. I tried to picture my son, his hands, the way he looked at me in that hospital corridor when he mentioned the accounts. The indifference in his eyes now made more sense. He wasn't grieving, he was planning. Lel continued quietly. Her cooperation would lead to a lighter sentence, but it also sealed his fate. I didn't ask for the details, but he shared them anyway. As clinical as lawyers tend to be. 18 years for Miles, fraud and manslaughter. 15 years for Tanya, for tampering and bribery. The district attorney's office is finalizing the rulings now. By Monday, they will stand before the judge. 18 years, my son. I wanted to feel anger or satisfaction, something sharp enough to match what had been done. But all I experienced was emptiness and hollow feeling that hums beneath your ribs. Lel placed a new set of papers in front of me. These are your closing affidavit. It confirms that the estate assets remain in your name without challenge. I signed each page slowly, my hands trembling just enough to blur my signature. When I finished, I leaned back and watched the ink dry. He sought protection. I murmured, not for revenge. Leal nodded softly. And protection is exactly what you've given him. You prevented them from changing his story. I looked out the window. Outside, the rain had turned into mist, a gentle curtain over the city lights. Somewhere downtown, my son was sitting alone in a holding cell. I pictured him quietly staring at the wall, realizing too late that all his father ever wanted was honesty. Lel collected the paper and shut his briefcase. I will be in court on Monday morning. You don't need to come, he said. I will be there, I answered softly. He deserves at least one parent who shows up. It wasn't forgiveness I brought into that courtroom. It was the proof that love continues, even when people are gone. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and left me with this steady, unchanging ticking of the clock, impartial and unwavering. When I finally stood up, the house felt different, lighter perhaps, or just emptied of the lies that had inhabited it for too long. Justice had arrived quietly, without fanfare. It moved slowly and intentionally, just as Timothy would have wanted. Even when justice comes gently, it leaves a mark. The morning air held that clear, calm stillness that only spring after rain can bring, refreshing, yet heavy with memory. The Anderson estate had felt deserted since Timothy's death, but that day it finally seemed to breathe again. The large mahogany table in the study shone softly beneath the chandelier. Once it had been the setting for board meetings, family announcements, and shared laughter over company milestones. Today, it was the place for something more subdued: closure. Only a few people were present: Mr. Lell, the senior partners from the firm, and three longtime employees whom Timothy had trusted like family. No cameras, no press, no unnecessary show. Just the truth laid out plainly in illegal language. Lyle adjusted his glasses and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. This is the final reading of the amended trust clause, which was signed 3 days before Mr. Anderson's passing. Per his instruction, all assets transferred to Mrs. Pamela Anderson are now legally confirmed and cannot be changed. The court has officially recognized her as the sole executor and beneficiary of the estate. The words fell heavy in the quiet room. Papers rustled, pens clicked, even the sound of breathing seemed carefully measured. I sat at the head of the table, the same position Timothy had held for many years. The cool leather chair against my back provided a sense of stability. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been deeply involved in restitution work, checking accounts, auditing transfers, and reaching out to every employee who had remained loyal through the upheaval. The company was not just staying afloat, it was starting to rebuild, Leal explained. Also, following your approval, Mrs. Anderson, all remaining business accounts tied to the misuse consulting fund have been closed. The recovered assets amount to around $1.4 million. This week, the firm will transfer those funds to the estate maintenance account. I nodded quietly, feeling grateful that the damage hadn't been worse. The employees, Lael, smiled faintly. Everything was restored as of this morning. Salaries were paid and back wages were settled. Last night, you really helped many people sleep easier. That was the first moment I could breathe easily in what felt like months. Timothy believed that a company is only as strong as the people who support it. I softly said, it's time they knew he was right. Next to Liel, a senior accountant named Curtis, who had been with Timothy from the very start, cleared his throat. Mrs. Anderson, he began, his voice a little shaky, on behalf of the staff, we want to thank you for not letting the story end in the wrong way. I gave a slight smile. The story isn't finished. It's just honest again. Curtis nodded with tears in his eyes. The meeting continued for another hour, with every document signed and every ledger balanced. When it was finished, the others excused themselves, leaving Lel and me alone in the study. The heavy silence that had filled the room earlier had eased. It felt calm now, like the house had been waiting for this moment to finally breathe. Leal closed his folder and looked at me. You handled this with more grace than most people could. I let out a small laugh that didn't quite reach my eyes. Grace has nothing to do with it. I simply didn't want Timothy's name to be altered by people who didn't deserve it. He nodded in agreement. You succeeded. I started to walk slowly around the table. My hand brushed against the edge of the chair at the far end. It was the one Miles had always used during family gatherings, back when he still called his father Dad, not the man who no longer understood succession. The leather was untouched, perfect. The chair still sat slightly pulled away from the table, as if he had left it waiting. I looked at it for a long moment. That chair had once represented continuity, legacy. Now it was only an empty seat, proof that greed had no place in inheritance. Leal started gathering his belongings into his briefcase, but I spoke before he could close it. He told me to keep it safe. I replied quietly, my eyes still fixed on the chair. Now you understand why. Leal looked at me with a gentle but serious expression. He made a good choice. I traced my fingers along the smooth surface of the table one last time, feeling the faint grooves of shears of work carved into the wood. Timothy's work, our work. Outside, the sun finally pierced through the clouds, casting golden light across the floor. The room felt lighter, not just because justice had been served, but because order had been restored. One signature, one truth, one reckoning at a time. As Lil stepped out, I stayed behind, listening to his footsteps gradually echo down the corridor. Then I turned back to the empty chair, the one my son used to sit in, and whispered so softly that even the walls had to strain to hear. Safe, Timothy, just as you asked. The house had never experienced such peace before, not the kind that follows laughter or celebration, but the calm that remains after chaos has subsided. Months had passed since the hearing, since the last document was signed, and since the final verdict confirmed Timothy's warnings were true. Yet the silence still felt unusual, like stepping into a life that remembered too much. That evening, I sat at the same table where everything had begun. The gentle ticking of the grandfather clock filled the quiet, its slow and steady rhythm, reminding me the time moves forward, whether hearts do or not. The dining room hadn't changed. The polished wood, the faint aroma of lemon oil, and the two candlesticks that had seen every argument and apology remained the same. On the table before me, there were three items: a glass of wine, Timothy's gold cufflinks, and the wristwatch Mr. Leal had brought back earlier that afternoon. It made a gentle ticking sound, its rhythm weaving through the silence like a heartbeat. Leal had stopped by to deliver the final discharge papers. Those that signify every case, claim, and question had now been officially settled. He stood in the doorway, his coat draped over one arm, speaking softly as he always did. "It's done, Pamela," he said. "Everything is finalized, everything is cleared. The estate remains untouched. No more hearings." He placed the cufflinks on the table next to the papers, then offered a small, faint smile. "You see, he wears them to every meeting, saying they remind him of where he began." I smiled back. He deserved that reminder. When he left, the house once again felt too spacious, too silent. But this time, I didn't mind. I had come to understand that silence wasn't emptiness, it was healing. I ran my finger along the rim of my glass, listening to the gentle hum blending with the ticking of the clock. My reflection in the wine surface appeared older, more at peace. The grief still lingered. It had just learned to sit beside me instead of across from me. I thought of Miles. Not the man in handcuffs, not the son in the headlines, but the boy who used to build Lego skyscrapers in this very room while Timothy pretended to negotiate mergers over juice boxes. I still saw that child sometimes, especially in dreams before everything went wrong. They called me brave for staying through the storm, but I didn't feel brave. I felt necessary. Justice hadn't brought me happiness, it had given me stability. I got up and walked over to the cabinet, taking down one of Timothy's old tumblers. The glass reflected the light just as it had that night, the night he looked across this same table and said the words that changed everything. "Pam, I need you to transfer everything to your account just to be safe." At the time, it sounded like paranoia. Now I knew it was a warning. I poured a small splash of wine into the tumbler and placed it opposite me, where he used to sit. The chair made a small creak. Like the faint memory of him shifting in it, I did as you asked. I whispered. I kept it safe. Outside, the last evening rays slipped through the windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Somewhere a bird sang once and then fell silent again. I reached for the watch, the metal cold against my hand. The second hand moved smoothly and steadily, never wavering. It kept time, even when everything else seemed to have come to a halt. I gently placed it on my wrist. It fit perfectly. As I settled back, I looked around the room, the place where trust had become a legacy, where loss had become proof. The air felt full again, not with ghosts, but with a quiet peace earned slowly over time. At the far end of the table, the empty chair caught a streak of sunlight, and for an instant it seemed as if he was sitting there, calm, knowing, proud. I smiled. The clock struck 8. The house was silent, and for the first time since that night, I did not feel alone at the table.